June 24th, 2001, summertime, but where is the sunshine? A busy weekend in the North Country. The weatherman thought he was going to throw a monkey wrench into the Lozier, but we fixed him. We're on the old base oval, former Plattsburgh Air Force Base, for the third annual Great Adirondack Antique and Classic Car Show. But we're here to talk about the Lozier automobile, near and dear to our hearts, and especially near and dear to some other hearts. And we've got a couple of those hearts with us. Dr. Tony Vaccaro, how are you?
Good. How are you today, Gordy?
I'm great. Owen Barkham?
Hey, I'm fine.
I wish I had a hat like that. Owen said, I'm so scared. Are you going to ask me hard questions? And I always say no. If I were more intelligent, I could answer and ask hard questions, but I'm not smart enough to do that. Tony, you're a transplant. When did you get in Plattsburgh?
Oh, my wife and I arrived here in 1990. We came up from Philadelphia, originally from Johnstown, Pennsylvania, the western part of the state. Town similar, actually it's surprising. Johnstown's very similar to Plattsburgh. And that's one reason why we like it up here so much. Down there we have lakes. Here you have big lakes. Down there we have hills. Up here you have mountains to ski. But it's been nice. We've been up here for 11 years, and since then we've added to our family with 2 daughters, and it's just been great.
I called your home this morning, and your little girl answered the phone, and she, instead of saying hello, she said, "Are you the man who's bringing the car?"
Well, I don't know which daughter that would be. That was probably Lauren, my older daughter. She's 7, and she understands we're getting a new car in the family, and she's all excited about it.
Well, you've really turned this into a real passion. How did you first get interested in the Lozier automobile?
Well, my passion is really with auto racing, and about 7 or 8 years ago, I was sitting in my house out at Cumberland Head, and I was going through one of my car magazines, and on the last page, they had this article that says, "This car probably won the 1911 first ever Indianapolis 500. And I thought, this is an interesting article. And in fact, the article is actually copied, and it's over there for us to see later on. But I was reading this article, and I got to the 3rd paragraph, and it was talking about this Lozier car. That there was this car, they said it was really a stock car. It was sort of the original definition of what a true stock car is in racing. In other words, they took the car from the factory, took the fenders off, took the headlights off, drove it to the track, and raced it. And then I'm reading about the 3rd paragraph, and it says Plattsburgh, New York. I said, wait a minute, where is this coming from? And then so I started researching it. And in fact, one of my friends, Jim Morgan, who works at the hospital, said, oh yeah, they used to build these cars here in Plattsburgh. In fact, right down the street, I think it was where the Georgia Pacific plant is. So we started researching more into it, and it became a very interesting story from the auto racing perspective. Harry Lozier took a car to the Indianapolis 500 for the first ever race, and there was about halfway through the race, there was a major accident, took out a number of cars. And back then, this was all new. People hadn't sort of done this before. Certainly a race, that was this long and with 40 people in it. It was the biggest race ever run in the world at the time. And when they had this major accident, one of the cars took out timing and scoring, which was a picnic table on the front straightaway.
Oh, that's where it started, huh?
And I argued, actually the race finished up, and Ralph Mulford, driving the Lozier, did 2 or 3 laps at the end of the race. They used to do that back in those days just to make sure that they got all their laps in, even though they were told they won the race. And then a big controversy came about between him and Ray Haroon, who was driving the Wasp, the Marion Wasp, and it took him 3 days to sort it out, and they finally gave the victory to Ray Haroon. But then later on, when people sort of reviewed the records and looked at what actually transpired as far as when people stopped, repairs made during the race, how long they were in the pits, et cetera, and sort of pieced it together, there's quite a bit of evidence that actually Ralph Mulford, driving a Lozier from Plattsburgh, New York, possibly won the first ever Indianapolis 500. And I think that says a lot for our little city, for them to put together a car that was that great, both on the street and on the track. and Ralph received the second place trophy, which we actually have a picture of over there to show you.
Yeah, so much memorabilia. Is this all your stuff or things?
Well, it's Owen Barcombe has been working for 30 years collecting things up, and I've been collecting for the last couple years. And we put it together, and Owen and I, actually it's an interesting story. Owen and I met for the first time an hour and a half ago.
Come on.
This is true. We've been friends on the phone for the longest period of time working on this project, exchanging information, exchanging things, and I met him for the first time. He just flew up for the show.
That's amazing. Now, you're originally from the North Country, Owen, right?
Yes, I am.
Well, you told me you'd left. Where you live now?
Down in Safety Harbor, Florida. I've been down there for about 20 years. But I've been collecting Lozier stuff here since roughly the mid-'60s. You know, keep adding to it. And
I read your little histories. Tony's wife faxed me over a couple of pages of questions I was supposed to ask, but I like to wing it in these things that I do. But I did read that your interest goes back to 1962, and I came here in 1961. So tell us how that all transpired in the beginning for you.
Well, actually, out of high school, I was working at Georgia Pacific, and I was working the midnight shift. And we had a break, and this older guy who worked with me, which I can't remember his name offhand, said to me, "You know, they used to build cars here." He says, "I came in with my dad when I was 8 years old, and we see cars lined up here that were building cars, putting motors and stuff together." And I got real infused with that, and I started collecting this and that, and build up today and studying the history of Lozier. Seen as many cars. I've probably seen 8 or 10 Loziers in my whole day, as far as
You've seen 8 or 10?
at car shows and auctions and whatnot.
Museums?
Anywhere there's a Lozier, I try to get to it and see it.
We should tell people right off the bat that there aren't very many Loziers left, maybe 40 in the world.
Yeah, there's about 40 of them that we know of anyhow that are still left.
And probably not more than 10 that were made here in Plattsburgh.
That's about right, about 10. Because the way I looked at it, cars were made in Plattsburgh from 1905 roughly to 1910. Then they moved their operation to Mack Avenue in Detroit, which lasted to roughly 1915.
But the just to put a plug in for Plattsburgh, though, the plant here, actually, Owen's correct, they moved to Detroit, but the plant was operational here to the end of 1914. So they continued to manufacture parts. One of the things about the manufacturing of Lozier was everything was made here. They had their own foundry. They poured their own metals. They machined out the parts that they needed. Everything was done right here in the factory. And then after they made the move to Detroit, because everybody was moving to Detroit, it was the place to be for manufacturing of cars. They kept the plant going here to, once again, to the end of about 1914, and kept producing parts for the assembly of the vehicles in Detroit.
Your car is 1950.
Right. It was right at the end there, right when they closed the plant out in 1914, and in 1915 they produced the Model 82, and then the company unfortunately went financially down. They overexpanded. Two things happened. One, they grossly overestimated what their production would be, or what their demand for the production would be. And you were talking about cars that were custom built. All these cars were, not only the Loziers, but cars of that era were all hand built, customized for the owners. The bodies were built by coach work. People worked on built coaches, so the bodies are out of wood, hand built. And these cars, the beauty of these cars and the effort that they put into these cars to design the best cars in the world, which they really did. You were talking about a car at its premier time was $7,000 to purchase. In dollars back then, it was a $7,000 car.
And houses cost $200, $300, $3,500.
Well, even if that, back then, I don't know what houses were, but we were talking about, cars that were built and sold to the kings and the queens of the world. These cars... Movie stars. We actually have a picture of Katharine Hepburn in one of the cars. The cars were used in a number of Hollywood movies. These were premier, beautiful brass, what's called brass era cars. They were gorgeous.
Owen, it's amazing how we get hooked on things in our lifetimes, and we like to collect things. And I know you'd love to collect about 10 Lozier cars if you could. And it wouldn't surprise me if even airing this show on the public access channels around the North Country, somebody comes forward and says, so-and-so worked with the Lozier Company, and so-and-so did this, and we know where there is a engine block in somebody's basement. People come out of the woodwork. And it was kind of amazing when you stop to think about how hard it was to make one of these cars back before the assembly line actually started. We should mention that Mr. Lozier ran a bicycle company before he came here. Wait a minute, I want to drag out a picture that I found on the internet. We're talking with Owen about the bicycle company. Actually, Mr. Lozier had a bicycle plant, didn't he?
He sure did. He had the Cleveland Bicycle Company, and I believe it was around 1899 that he actually sold it to American Bicycle Company for $4 million.
Big
Which was
money.
big bucks.
Back in those
And that set the tone for Lozier to have enough money to get into building these expensive cars.
I just dropped that piece of information off the internet this morning. Talk about dropping names. In 1896, Shakespeare would ride the bicycle if alive today. You gotta love that. The reasons why, and I happened to notice Lozier's name down in the corner, 1896, so we put a peg on it. I also got a real neat picture of the 1906 Lozier 7-passenger touring car off another website here so people can take a look at it. All told, Lozier made only a few thousand, like 4,000
I think around 4,000.
I think that was the count. At the maximum, they were producing between several hundred cars a year. And when they went to Detroit, the plan was to build 1,000 cars a year or so. Once again, that never happened. The market never existed. And also we were trying to get into an era that I think we were heading into a depressive era then, and money was not available for these expensive toys.
It was what were you going to say?
I was going to say that in 1905, I believe they produced roughly 11 cars.
No kidding.
In 1906, I think they went up to like 26 cars. And in 1907, they went up a little bit higher to around 60-some cars. And 8 and 9 and 10, they started in which are 200 and 300 and worked way up in Plattsburgh here to around 600 cars. Then they moved to Detroit, like Tony was saying, to expand there.
The Lozier car was possibly the first car in America to have a 6-month warranty.
It was. You have to understand that they were hand-built. And then each car and every car was road tested over the roads in Clinton County here.
Hundreds of miles, 400 or 500 miles.
5 to 1,000 miles, 500 to 1,000 miles. Taken back in and tore down and examined, and every part was examined. Put back together, then it was shipped to New York to put their bodies
Talking
on.
micrometers, checking tolerances.
The whole 9 yards. The whole 9 yards.
I've done television shows and radio interviews for over 40 years here, and I've had various people say, my grandfather was the one who test drove those things, and you'd see that Lozier whipping down Margaret Street and
well, in the
in
70s,
the cold air.
In the 70s, I got to talk to Ed Perry. He worked at Lozier. He was a test driver at Lozier, and I had an interview with him for about an hour one Sunday afternoon. Very interesting guy to talk to back then. And he was the one that told me that, these cars were position built. They were the Mercedes of America. And actually your pistons and stuff were so good that we could take them out of a Lozier and put them into a Mercedes at that time.
There's also a little side story on that, though. Lozier was a bit clever on how he decided he was going to start manufacturing cars. And actually, Ed Perrin supposedly left Lozier when they were building boats, because it was the era of building boats between the bicycles and the cars. And he left and he went to work for Mercedes-Benz for 6 months. And then he decided to come back and take his old job at the Lozier power plant. Or the Lozier Motor Car Company. And it's true, the initial cars were very similar to Mercedes. So some of the original ideas came from Mercedes-Benz, what Ed Perrin had learned with his 6 months over in Europe.
Now, Mr. Lozier had a dream way back when, and guess what? These guys here today have a dream as well. First of all, I looked at the internet this morning, and I saw some interesting slogans for pioneer cars. For the Lozier, it was the choice of men who know. I said when I got here, it should have been the choice of very rich men who know.
Yes.
But I can understand how you folks and a lot of other people got involved in loving the Lozier car, because there's so much mystery. After 95 years or more, there's still a controversy over who won the race. I mean, you know, it's a great mystery. And where is there another car in somebody's barn that we don't know about?
Well, you know, we've been looking. We're hoping still to turn up things. We, besides the 82 that I now own, we've got a collection of parts that we've acquired from all over the country. We've really been working hard. Later on, you'll meet Eric Edwards. He's been working very hard with his contacts. He's in the business of restoration, talking to people, searching out things. And you know, the whole project's been fun. For example, Eric was on the phone about 4 or 5 months ago, and he was talking to somebody, and this is up in Canada. He lives up in Baxter, Ontario, north of Toronto. And he was talking to somebody on the phone saying, you know, I'm working on this project with this fellow from Plattsburgh, and we're trying to find Lozier parts. And the guy on the end of the phone goes, well, did you go over to see Mr. So-and-so? And he said, who are you talking about? And he says, oh, the old guy, he lives about 80 miles down the road from you. He says, what are you talking about? He goes, oh, he's got a barn full of all kinds of old car parts. I have no idea what you're going to find there. Eric said, fine. Took the phone number, called the guy up, and the guy says, yeah, I got a bunch of old parts. You want to look through them? That's fine. So he drove straight over. It was about an hour and a half drive or so. And he climbs up in the loft of this old barn, and he finds a steering column and a steering box. And on the side of it, it says Lozier. Oh, and then he found some gauges, and he found some other parts that he's brought home to us. So, yeah, we've been collecting parts. We've been, you know, hitting, you know, every avenue every lead that we can find. The most recent lead that I had, a lady called me. One of my patients actually had gotten in touch with me and said, I remember this fellow who lived over at Hillcrest Drive that I knew. This goes back many years, and he had some blueprints, and I think it might have been a Lozier. And he says, all I can tell you is his daughter's name is Janine Sumbler, and she went on to marry a Dr. Austin over in Potsdam. So I started calling over to Potsdam, and yes, lo and behold, there was a Dr. Austin who's now retired. And Janine called me back. I left messages all over the place and actually wrote a letter to the hospital, and she finally got the word and called me just last week. And she says, I don't have blueprints of a Lozier. She said, but I have something you may be interested in seeing, and I'm hoping Owen and I are going to take a run over next week. She says she has a silver tray with about 40 names on it engraved that was given to her grandfather, who worked in the Lozier plant, and when he stopped working in 1908 or 1909, they gave this to him as a going away present. So we're going to go look at this.
What a treasure.
Yeah, we're going to go check this out in the next week. She invited us over, and she has a couple other little tidbits. So we just keep looking, and you never know what you're going to turn up.
You never know where you're going to find things. Many years ago in the 1970s, I visited a place called Heritage Plantation in Sandwich on Cape Cod for the first time. They have a wonderful antique car museum there in an old octagon-shaped barn. And I thought, well, maybe they'll have a Lozier automobile. They didn't. They did have a radiator cap in a display in the lobby just to whet my appetite on the way in. Mm-hmm. And so I've been interested in the Lozier ever since I first came here, and we learned that not only did they make automobiles here, but launches, engines, right, for boats.
Yes, they did.
The proximity to Lake Champlain is what brought Lozier here in the first place.
It sure was. That was their main reason for coming here. because of the lake and so on and so forth.
So they made some pretty tough marine engines as well, right?
Well, they did, and we actually have a couple on display this morning. These were single-cylinder engines for the most part, and Lozier's. This was the father. Now, the father actually was actually the son was Henry Lozier, but he called himself Harry, and the father was Harry also.
Oh, really?
But Harry Sr. used to get a charge out of racing, and he would build these boats, and yes, he would sell them to his rich customers, but he would actually race them, and he'd put on match races here and down around on the Hudson River down in New York City, because the main, for the boats and then the cars, the main sales office was actually in New York City. So he'd take his boats and he'd go race some very interesting people.
You know, we started out with an image of the Lozier plant in Plattsburgh. For those people who may be new to the area or who drive by North Margaret Street every day of their lives and don't know, that building is still there, oh.
It sure is. The boathouse is still there, and parts of the original plant are still intact with Georgia Pacific there.
We have some photographs of the inside. Ron Venn, our good friend Ron Venn, whom we've done how many programs with?
9 full ones.
9 full-length documentary television programs with Ron Venn. He's got pictures of the inside. They allowed him to go inside to take the before and after photographs. We also have a couple of models that he painstakingly built.
Yeah.
Is this guy amazing? Or what?
He's amazing. He's got about 1,000 hours in each one of those models, and he built them from scratch, truly scratch. He created the blueprints, he researched the project, he created the blueprints, and he started building. And there's some really, the amount of work in it and the beauty of it is just spectacular.
I want to take a look around this room to see what we got. Calvin's already been filming some things. The collection grows almost daily, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. We here on the table we have a letter that I received about a month ago. Somebody who heard about the project as far as opening up the museum said maybe you'd like this for your museum. It's a letter dated the day after Christmas in 1911 from the superintendent of the factory to the local parole officer saying Lenny's a good guy. He's been showing up at work.
You gotta love it.
Yeah, I've got the original letter. So, these are little treasures you pick up along the way.
They're all treasures. And you have a dream, which we're going to talk about as we go through this morning on the Classic and Antique Car Show, the 3rd annual here in Plattsburgh Air Force Base, the Old Base Oval. Now, you have a dream for the future, and it's good fortune and good planning that today's edition of the Press Republican on June 24th, 2001 ran a very nice article, which you haven't seen yet because you've been so busy.
I was up at 5 o'clock trying to get ready for this show, and so I'm a little sleep deprived this morning also because I didn't get to bed till late.
It's a very good article about Bruce Carlin, about your project where you're starting a fund to collect some monies to open a Lozier museum, or at least an old antique car museum here.
Well, what happened was, I got, in talking to Owen, we got this idea about, we want to have a Lozier car museum. And, that sounds great, but, we have to be realistic. We want something that people will keep coming back to. And a sort of side note, the daughter you met this morning on the phone, Lauren, I came home late one night and she said, Daddy, where were you? She was up in bed and she was waiting for me. And I said, well, Daddy was meeting with a couple people to talk about opening up a museum. And she said, a museum? You're going to have a museum? And I said, yes, dear. I said, Lauren, we're going to have this museum in town. And she said, oh, that'll be great. There'll be things for us kids like motors to climb on and climb through. And she started talking about, and then the idea came that an interactive museum, both for adults and children, would be a wonderful thing. More than just a car museum where you have a few cars sitting in, nice, beautiful, expensive cars. We wanted to do something more than for the community. And the idea has then grown because of the boats and because of the bicycles and the history here within Plattsburgh. We've now gotten it to the point where, yes, we want to have a museum centered around the Lozier history, but an interactive museum for children and adults talking about transportation. And we think that that would be, enough to really have something in Plattsburgh that people would come from a long distance when they're passing by on the interstate and they see the sign. There'd be enough here for them to stop And we've been talking to the mayor, and we've been talking to Senator Stafford about the project, and they're very interested in it, and we're looking at some potential spots to put this in and how it would tie into areas, perhaps the riverfront, that they're hoping to develop down there. And there's all kinds of opportunities for us to have something that would really stand out and have people come to Plattsburgh and sell the city.
And I bet you it would bring you up here more often than you come up here now, wouldn't it, buddy?
It sure would.
I know you'd have your hands in the whole thing. We're on the, as I've said many times on this program with Calvin over the years, we're on the cusp of a very interesting time in our history in Plattsburgh and Clinton County. We've appreciated the history on all fronts for a long time, and we've promoted it for a long time. But finally, the rest of the world is catching up with our promotion, and we're talking a lot about the Battle of Plattsburgh, the War of 1812, the Battle of Valcour, tying in the entire Lake Champlain region for its rich history on the land and on the water. The Lozier is a part of that history, and anything we can do to make us happy with studying the history and passing it on to our children and their children, but also to bring tourists here. And that's the name of the game. I was so happy yesterday to be driving around the North Country, and once again I did like I did in the 70s and counted the license plates from Quebec and Ontario in town. We had a lot of Canadian visitors in town yesterday, and that pleased me. The kinds of things you people are talking about, and the other things that Battle of Plattsburgh committees and the War of 1812 committees are doing, will bring people here from Oshkosh and from Detroit, from New York City and places north, south, east, and west. And that's fun. It's fun to be part of all that.
Oh, when I was talking, I was at the Reading Car Show in September, and I met the president of the Horseless Carriage Society, the #1 society for antique cars in the United States, and he heard about this concept about developing the history of Lozier, and he was excited about it. And he said, it is true. He says, a lot of people don't realize the prominence Lozier used to have, both on the street and on the racetracks. And his words were, I will support you and our society will do whatever we can to help you develop a museum for Lozier. And we've got some real interesting people out there that have the knowledge and have the way to help make this project happen.
It has to start with an idea, right, Owen?
It sure does. And
Works
we
its
got the
way
idea.
up. You got the idea, then you get the support little by little, then you get the support of the public, and you go from there. There is a City of Plattsburgh website called cityofplattsburgh.com.
Yeah, we have one of our corporate sponsors, Media Central, headed up by Bruce Carlin, has volunteered to work on this project for us, and he's joined our committee. We now have a museum committee, and he's interested in collecting information not only in Lozier but other historic things about the Plattsburgh region and recording it so we have it forever and ever. And we had a meeting about 2 weeks ago, and we said we need a website, and Bruce said no problems, it'll be taken care of. 36 hours later I had an email. He said, check out cityofplattsburgh.com. Now that website, that domain had already been opened up for the various things, and it's supported by the Chamber of Commerce, but Bruce added in the Lozier Museum to it, and within 36 hours he had pictures, he had articles, he had information. I was incredibly impressed, and he's enthusiastic about the project. He wants to see it happen.
That's great. All right, I think Calvin has shown, what have you shown? A lot of the things on this table behind you. All right, let's take a little break. We're on the Old Base Oval on Sunday, June 24th, 2001, at the 3rd Annual Great Adirondack Antique and Classic Car Show, and our focus for this edition of our little corner is Lozier. If you never heard that name before today, you will hear it literally hundreds of times before we're finished. Among those people we're interviewing is Owen Barkham, who's had a passion for Lozier for many, many years. These are some of the things you brought with you. Calvin suggested that I ask you about dead ends. We've all had dead ends. Our audience knows we searched for Pike's Cantonment around here for many years, and now we believe we found the exact location of it. There are a lot of mysteries in this world. When you're talking about so few cars left, every time somebody calls you and says, I know where a Lozier is, of course you take off running. You couldn't stay home if you wanted to, right?
No,
so
because
tell me about those dead ends.
You want to check out every lead that comes your way.
Got to.
Because, one may hit someday. And I've chased cars all around the Adirondacks, all around Clinton, Franklin, Essex County, even into Quebec, and nothing really materialized. In some cases, the cars were there in the 40s or late 30s, but you have to understand when World War II came along, a lot of these cars went by the wayside because they needed metal for the war effort.
Does that make you want to cry and cry?
They were
and
just,
cry?
they were just.
Yeah.
I've chased cars around and seen different Loziers all over, basically over the United States, this side anyhow, on the East Coast.
Wow. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what we have here.
Well, I've been collecting magazine ads for the last 30 years. And Life magazine had a lot of good ads back in those days. And the Saturday Evening Post had some more ads. I probably have a couple hundred ads all total. Over
North Asbury Park. Look at this.
Right.
Down in New Jersey. Wow.
And, I really love the colored ads. They're, shows the...
Oh, there it is. The choice of men who know.
The choice of men who know. And it's still the choice of men who knows.
Oh, yeah, you got that right. So how many of these do you have?
I would say 100 to 200 ads,
Wow.
that I have in my collection altogether.
You probably have one of the largest collections of its kind in the country then.
I think I do, but there may be somebody that has a little better.
You'd love to meet up with, have you connected with other people who are collecting Loziers?
Oh, yes. Yeah, there's a guy in California that I talk with once in a while. There's a guy in Florida that I visit once in a while that has a Lozier, and we talk back and forth on stuff.
That's wonderful. It just makes me wonder what are in those basements and attics around here. Let's turn back here and take a look at some of these engines. Where did this stuff come from, Tony?
Well, these were actually given to me from Mike Turner out in Seattle. And these are pictures of the motors. This was the 6-cylinder, and then we had the 4-cylinder from both sides. And if you look carefully, these are actually artists' renditions. They're not really pictures, and that's how they used to do it back then. They didn't have the photography, so if they wanted something like this, they had to get somebody produce it, an artist to produce it. And you can see the beautiful work, the detail in these pictures that existed in these engines. We also have a picture of one of the original cars. This is a very stripped model. You'll see pictures later
That might be
on.
what it looked like in the race.
Well, exactly. This is what they did. They took the cars and they, once again, took the unnecessary pieces off of it and took it to the racetrack. They didn't modify the engine. They didn't modify the suspension. They didn't do anything special other than just remove the items they didn't need, and they'd put a 35-gallon fuel tank in the back of it and go racing.
Isn't that amazing? Beautiful stuff. All right, moving along. You've made a great display in a tent here on the former Air Base Oval. What do we have at this table?
Well, now you can see actually in the back we have some beautiful pictures of Loziers. And this is what they referred to as the brass era of cars. And you can see the beautiful brass work. They had the detail in brass or nickel plating. And you're seeing now the true look of the Lozier, the $7,000 car. They had incredible detail. They looked expensive. They looked rich. They looked like they needed to be owned by somebody who had money.
Yeah, I wonder who this guy is down here. Where was that taken, my friend?
That was taken, this is Jerry Foley's car, taken out of Jacksonville about 20 years ago when I met up with Jerry. And
You haven't changed a bit.
I try not to. Yeah.
How many cars in Florida?
Loziers, there's about 3 or 4 that I know of.
No wonder you went to Florida. It
Well,
wasn't necessarily for the weather, was it?
well, for the sunshine. Yeah.
That's pretty neat. And this is the elder
Right.
Harry Lozier?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we believe that it's Mr. Lozier, and we believe it's the father rather than the son.
These are great photographs. Some of them are. This one we don't know where they were all taken, though, do we? You
No, I
know where
don't.
that one was taken, for example? Beautiful shot.
But here we have one being, I believe here's a photograph of one of the cars being road tested. As Owen said, they used to take them and run them for 500 miles and make sure that they ran properly before they went to the owners.
And then check all the parts and replace them if it was necessary to do so. I imagine some of those pictures might have been taken here in Plattsburgh and some in Detroit, huh?
I would say.
All right. That's great. Boy, you guys have collected a lot of stuff.
Well, keep looking, you find things.
I chatted with your wife a while this week. I'm not going to mention all of her comments here on tap. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, she is rather supportive. I don't know if you've given her any choice at all.
Well, actually, initially I did give her a choice. I said, honey, I'm going to go off and do this, and I'm going to go out and find a Lozier and bring it home to Plattsburgh. And she just looked at me like I was crazy because, I mean, 2 houses down from us used to be Joe Church.
Oh,
and his
sure.
dad was Walt Church, is my understanding. I hope I have the history right. And Walt was the fellow who started Plattsburgh Motor Supply.
Motor service, yeah.
Service, forgive me. And Joe used to tell me his dad used to look for a Lozier and wanted always to own a Lozier. Walt and Joe had one of the largest car collections in the state of New York at one time, and they never had a Lozier. And of course now we have the advantage of with the internet and communications, the email and what have you. It was a lot easier for us to sort of track down things and track down the cars and find out where they were and which ones would possibly be available. But we collected here quite a number of ads that came out of magazines such as Life, the Saturday Evening Post.
They're beautiful. There's a perfect example of
Quality, the
touring cars, 5 models at $5,000, limousines at $6,500.
yeah. Back in those days, we're talking the dollars of those days. You know, you compare that to when Henry Ford started producing cars. I mean, Henry Ford was selling cars for what, $600-800, and that's what really happened to these rich, expensive cars. My car, with 1915, which was the last of the line, was actually a cheap Lozier. It was only $3,200. They had to bring the price down. They brought a little bit of the quality down, but as we found in the restoration of the vehicle, it's wonderful. It's been built solid. The workmanship is wonderful. But they did try to bring the price down, build a cheaper car to compete, and they couldn't. They couldn't compete with the Henry Fords.
Isn't it amazing? Now we're getting into some of the real nitty-gritty Lozier memorabilia. And these are real photographs. Let's talk about some of them, whatever ones you'd like to mention first.
Well, these are Owen's pictures, and I love this one right here. I think this is a great photograph. This is the Lozier. You see the emblem there, Lozier. You see the baseball bat. They actually had a baseball team, a factory baseball team.
Owen, where'd you get that picture?
I picked it up several years ago, and I think I got it from someone here in Plattsburgh that told me that their either grandfather or father or somebody worked for them, and they had a picture of the baseball team, and I was interested, and that's how I acquired that one.
You know, chances are excellent, now that we're looking at these actual faces of people who worked there and played ball for that team, that some of their descendants are watching this very program, and that to me is kind of exciting. So those are obviously Plattsburgh area people on that team way back when.
They sure are.
Plattsburgh's had some really great baseball programs all around the area, and the Plattsburgh team up into the 50s when I first came here were the majors, right, Calvin? I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
But we have some other pictures. We have the typical winter pictures. This building is actually, if you drive over, I believe this part of this building is actually still on the Georgia Pacific grounds. They've just surrounded it with the factory. But we have our typical Plattsburgh winter scenes. But there are other pictures here within the plant, people working on the automobiles, the construction. I mean, this is a great picture. Look at this, how they're doing the production, and here you can see the cylinder blocks, and look at how they used to power all the equipment. They used to have these shafts coming across with these belts that would drive all the machinery so they could produce the parts that they needed, machine out the parts they needed.
It's kind of incredible when you think back. This is part of our Plattsburgh history, and to think that this very building that we looked at in the beginning of our show today still exists and is a part of our daily landscape. Oh boy, we got some stuff here. We got a steering wheel. What's that from?
Well, this is one of the parts we picked up. I own about 3 steering wheels now.
Oh,
Just
do you?
when somebody says, "Oh, I have one," I'll say, "How much?" and buy it. This is an old steering wheel from a Lozier. They used to nickel plate it and then put this plastic covering over it with the finger grips. And very typical for their cars. We have some emblems here, the original Lozier emblems, and over here we have some hubcaps actually off the Lozier cars. We have a brass lamp here.
Oh, that's kind of neat. Wow.
Oh, this is neat.
That would be acetylene, right?
Well, that's the interesting thing about this. You can see on the top, Lozier produced exclusively for Lozier. You can get a good picture.
Yep.
But if you notice, if you look inside, there's 2 little burners in there. And they didn't have electric lights back then. They actually had acetylene. They had a acetylene tank, just like your acetylene tanks that you use for welding, what have you. And they would create a light. And that's how you would see yourself down the road back in those days.
That's amazing. Well, this shows a picture of almost identical to your steering wheel, doesn't it? Right there.
This is all an article that was in the Horseless Carriage Gazette, as the cover shows there. And this article ran in September of last year. And as they say, the greatest endurance car in the world. And they actually, if you look very closely, here's a picture of Plattsburgh. It says Plattsburgh, New York, and this is the picture back then, the artist's rendition of the factory along the lake. They even have a picture of one of those original
tricycles.
tricycles. Yes.
Oh, that is so neat.
But they built a variety of cars. They built what were like limousines. They were enclosed bodies.
Wow,
and then they
40
built,
horsepower.
Yeah, back then that was quite a bit. And then they had the open roadsters. And this particular model would be the type of car that they would take this back seat out and put a 35-gallon tank in and go racing.
We should tell our viewers, when they like to compare, everybody likes to compare speeds. Some of these early Loziers would do 80, 85 miles an hour, maybe 90 miles an hour, whereas most of the early cars, if they were lucky, they could do 20 or 30 miles an hour.
That's right.
So that's why this car did so well in Indianapolis in the very first race.
Well, back in 1909, 1910, I mean, races, the average speeds at races were 65 mile an hour.
Yeah.
So that sort of puts it into perspective at what kind of speeds they used to reach if their average was at 60, 65.
That's really decent. All right, what else?
Well,
here's
the article.
Auto Week.
This is the article I was talking about. This is what got me started. And if you look closely, it'll say right here, opened a powerboat factory at Plattsburgh, New York. And if you look at the title, it says, some claim this stock car won the first Indianapolis 500. And it's a picture of Ralph Mulford with his riding mechanic. It was the Type 46. It was a 4-cylinder. The 46 stood for 46 horsepower. But they had 2 ways of rating horsepower back then. And if you compare it today to today's way of rating horsepower, it was more like about a 60, 65 horsepower engine. But there's a real nice picture of Ralph and the car, and you can see still got the headlights on it, but they've removed the fenders and they've got the large fuel tank in the back where it's got 33 on it. And it talks it's a nice article that explains about this race where there was this big controversy. Next to it, we actually have the Lozier racing record.
Oh, wow.
And there's a lot of information here, obviously. But these are the races that Lozier entered from 1907 down to 1911, including the Indianapolis 500. But he went on to win, at that time actually, was not the Indianapolis 500, was the big race. It was actually the Vanderbilt Cup. And it was sponsored by the Vanderbilt family. They used to race on Long Island, and then they moved the races to Savannah, Georgia. and they actually took first place at that race on November 27th, 1911. It was considered the biggest race in the United States at that time. And at that race, you had Peugeot, you had Mercedes-Benz, you had Fiat, and they all showed up with their very expensive, purebred race cars. Not street cars, race cars. And Lozier showed up and beat them all.
Don't you love it?
Yeah.
600 cubic inch class.
Oh yes, yes. The Lozier engines that they ran were 554 cubic inch. The crankshafts were about 5.5 feet long. As somebody said to me, it takes 2 men and a baby to pick up the crankshaft.
Isn't that amazing?
And this is something very interesting. I don't know if you were able to see this well on camera. That is a trophy that's about 2.5 feet tall. And when we were on our Lozier expedition, my friend Eric Edwards and I went out to California to try to see if we could acquire a Lozier. And we met with a fella. His first name was Mike, and I'm lost for his second name. But we couldn't work an arrangement out with him. So we needed something else to do for the rest of the afternoon. We heard that there was this Black Hawk car museum in Danville, California. So we took a drive over. And we were walking around in this museum. They have these beautiful cars. They have Bugatti Royale, which is considered the most expensive car in the world at $17 million. And just some incredible race cars and street cars. And then they had a section on art, racing art, with pictures and trophies and what have you. And we walk around the corner, and in a display case is that trophy. Now, if you look very closely, it says second, and it's got the Indianapolis Motor Speedway emblem on it, and it has won by Lozier driver Ralph Mulford. This trophy from the 1911 Indianapolis 500 sits out in California in a display case.
And you didn't know it until that very day.
Didn't. We walked in and said, "Oh my gosh, we just found the Holy Grail," and we just couldn't believe it. And that museum is affiliated with the Smithsonian Institute. And we're hoping if someday we can get our museum up and running, that at least on a loan basis we can get that trophy back to Plattsburgh for a few months, because that's where it came from.
And you get on your knees and beg.
Yeah, well, I might have to do that.
It may come to that. These are some wonderful pieces of memorabilia. Great photographs. Show you what racing looked like back in those days. Talk about seat of the pants, like seat of the pants flying. Seat of the pants racing was the thing. We have a lot of great magazines here.
Well, these are Lozier. These are Owen's collection. He should really explain.
Well, let's do it. What do we got on this table?
Well, first of all, Carson Parks did a 3-month article on Lozier that I helped Menno Dirksen write at that time back in 70, I think it was 78 and 79. And these are mostly parts of pictures from the book, from the magazine. He'd done a beautiful story called The Lozier Story.
Oh, great photographs. So you got a collection, you got several collections. These are all different magazines?
Well, some of them might be the same magazine with different pages, but some of these are different magazines.
So these photographs all exist. I love it. All right. Calvin's getting some good pictures. Did they actually have yellow Loziers like the one in that picture over there? Or was
I
that
believe they
color?
did.
No kidding.
The cars were custom made. You could have any color you wanted. There was some standard colors. It was a dark green, a dark blue, and it was a third color. But my understanding is when you put down your $7,000, whatever you wanted, you could have.
Unlike Henry Ford,
No,
you'd have
that's
any
right.
color you want as long as it's black. Oh gosh. So what do we got here?
Well, this is the 82. This is the Type 82 that I actually purchased. I got it out of Seattle, Washington. There's an interesting story about it coming from Barney Pollard. Barney Pollard was a fella back in the 30s, was a contractor, and he built most of the roads in the Detroit region, and he also built the Ambassador Bridge across the river. And when he was doing this, he was doing some kind of deals with the government, I think at the state level, regarding whatever money he took in, he wouldn't have to pay state income tax. So he had his hand in there somewhere. and some connection. But he did good work. He built things and made the city, helped get the city along. And he, at one point in time, he'd been going out and buying these old cars. Now, you're talking about then the cars were only 20, 25 years old. We're not talking what was considered classic antique. And he was picking these cars up very inexpensively. At one point, the story is, he had the largest car collection in the United States. He had 1,100 cars.
Wow.
So World War II comes along. So the government comes along and says, you know all those favors? Well, it's time to repay some of them. And we want those 1,100 cars. And he said, why? And he said, I want the frames for steel. The government said, we want the frame, we want to melt them down, use the steel to build boats. And we want the brass off of them to build casings for ammunition.
Sure.
Well, Barney said, no, this is my car collection, you can't have it. So he got into a little bit of a fight with the government. So what he did was he took about 40 of his favorite cars and hid them away. And then a bunch of these cars did end up going to the government. And in fact, that's what happened to a lot of these beautiful antique cars. They got destroyed for World War II, for the need for the materials. Well, this 82 was one of his 40 cars, and it was tucked away in a garage. And about 5 or 6 years ago, Pollard Jr., Barney Pollard Jr., who's now about 75 or 80, decided he was going to start bringing these cars out and selling them off. He wanted to get rid of them. He wanted to clear out his dad's collection. So quietly, he's been selling these cars. And I didn't buy the car right from Pollard. Somebody else did. But then I bought the car from that fellow out in Seattle, Washington. And this is the car. And what we did was we started a restoration project on it. Initially, we thought, typical restoration of a car. Well, we'll give it a paint job. Well, you know, if you do the paint, you got to do the leather. If you do the leather, you got to do this. Down to the frame, completely down to the frame, and that's where we are with the vehicle now, and we're building it back up. And these are the initial pictures where we've stripped the car down to the frame, took the motor out of it, doing the body work.
Now, let me, I don't know if you've mentioned it so far, how did you first meet Eric Edwards?
Eric Edwards, actually was through him I acquired this car.
Oh, I
and
see.
it was through
Okay.
an internet. He is a hobbyist / businessman restorer. He's not a big restorer. He does it for the love that he has for these old cars. He's a second generation. His father's from South Africa, who started the shop, so to speak, and they've got the grandson now, third generation, in on it too. And I talked to him on the phone about Lozier and the possibility of acquiring the 82. And he was the middleman in the project. And when we started talking about all this and started discussing the possibility of building a museum, he jumped on it. He's 100% behind the project. A little bit of it is, you know, it's a way for him. If we can have a museum for Lozier in Plattsburgh, he can go to the big car shows and go, well, I was the fellow that helped start the museum in Plattsburgh. You know, you might have got the locomobile to the Henry Ford Museum, but I got the Lozier to Plattsburgh.
He's not a young guy.
Well, he's 50.
Is he 50?
And we have an interesting relationship because when we, as most people know my career here in Plattsburgh, we were talking right off the beginning. He said, well, I work and I work alone. I work with my family, and I had a period of time where I had to slow down, and I said, what's that? And he goes, well, I had lymphoma of the neck, and I was treated by a radiation oncologist, and I'm now 8 years out, and I'm cured. So you talk about tying in a close story, and with that we've become...
You think somebody up there isn't running the show, pulling the strings?
Well,
So let's get
I've
Tony
often said
Vaccaro hooked up with this guy.
I've often said that there's somebody who's sort of been guiding us along on this project.
Chuckling.
I think
Chuckling,
that
saying,
somebody...
look what we did today.
I think somebody wants to see this project beside myself. Somebody wants to see this project accomplished.
That's a lot of coincidence right there.
There's a tremendous amount of coincidences so far in this project.
Oh, this is a wonderful tent. Now, you started early this morning setting this all up, didn't you?
I started at 5 o'clock trying to get everything into the
I
truck.
thought you were going to be out of town yesterday.
Well, I was out of town. I got in late last night. If I could, I took a fourth in a Formula 2000 race.
Wonderful.
So the
adrenaline's still pumping, huh?
Well, when I came home last night, I was quite exhausted because you're right. I was quite wound up from the racetrack. I was up at Mosport.
That's wonderful.
And it's just amateur stuff. I mean, it's people like myself.
So much fun.
It's a lot of fun, but it's the highest place I ever had in a race so far.
That's neat.
And I'm one off the podium, so I've got just one more step to go.
Yeah, we can't wait till that gold medal gets around your neck.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
What do you say we move outside the tent and take a look at the real engine here? I guess we...
Bill
Yes.
here.
Hey, Bill, how are you, sir?
Okay.
Good to see you. I saw you sitting here all along. This is amazing, this talk about the old Lozier, huh? Yes.
Very good.
It's really great. Bill's been working with collecting old cars and things for more than a couple of years, right, Bill?
Oh, 30, 40.
Yeah. Look at this. All right, let's talk a little bit. Let me get over here with you, Tony, right next to you. Let's talk about what we've got right here.
Well, these belong to Bill. These are boat motors, single-cylinder boat motors that run. And at some point we may even have a demonstration. Bill's restored them, works on them. He also has at least one Lozier boat in his garage. Two, forgive me.
You got a couple of boats?
Yes. Uh-huh. These are both used last year on a show here, but we didn't attempt to make it star here. But so just took the whole things over here to look at them.
That's amazing. This flywheel alone has got to weigh more than 50 pounds, doesn't it?
And try to. That one does.
Boy, oh boy, look at him.
Now you see the actual size of the piston that's inside here?
Sure.
These were, although they're single cylinders, they were quite large displacement engines. And they used to generate, they had a very long stroke on them, a 5-6 inch stroke on at least the car motors. And that's how they developed quite a bit of torque. The cars themselves were low revving engines. They were 2,000 RPMs, 2,500 RPMs, but developed tremendous torque. It was almost like a truck engine. And it was known that if you really stood on it, you could snap the spokes right off the wooden wheels.
That's amazing. Those are great engines. Now, while we're standing outside, some of our viewers might wonder, where is that Lozier automobile? Well, the Lozier automobile, as we've said a couple of times, is being restored by Eric Edwards up in Ontario, and it's far from really finished, is it?
It is. The project, since we took it down to the frame, it turned into a much more time project than we anticipated. We're excited about the project because, as far as we can tell, everything on the car is totally original, right down to some of the nickel plating on the frame. The wood inside the body, this coil springs on the seats have the original paint on them. It's a beautiful, well-kept car, and it was because it was stored away by Pollard for 45 years. Admittedly, the car was supposed to be here last night, and it's supposed to be here any moment. I got a call this morning at 5 o'clock saying we're in Kingston, Ontario on our way. He was trying to do some more work on it before bringing it down. And I know he and his son and his wife actually have been working non-stop, literally around the clock, to try to get the car into some shape for the show, and not really sure what the delay was as far as leaving Ontario to bring it here, but
Well, it's
they're supposed to be here any moment, so I keep hoping and keep my fingers crossed that they'll arrive.
only at average speeds, less than 3 hours away, Kingston, Ontario.
Well, that's when I know how Eric drives, and I'm surprised he's not here by now. I've ridden with him, but he should be here soon, and we'll unload the car immediately and let people take a close look at it.
For the benefit of our viewers, again, let me tell you that we're on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base Old Base Oval. This is the 3rd annual Great Adirondack Antique and Classic Car Show. And the Lozier was to be here as part of this, and hopefully before this day is finished, on the 24th day of June, the Lozier will be here and on display. And that's kind of exciting, just to be a part of this whole process and to talk about it. And you know what they say about Murphy's Law and the best laid plans, don't you, Tony?
Well, I'm afraid that's what would happen on this one, but we will get the car here today, and the car, after it's done today, will have to go back to Ontario for the rest of the work. But everything goes according to plan. One of the things we'd like to do with the car this fall is take it to the Old Car Festival at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn. The car can be entered there and driven on the grounds. They have the Greenfield Village, where if you have a car of the appropriate era, you're allowed on the property. You have to dress up accordingly,
Oh, you
and you
better.
get to display your car, and things like that we're interested in, because we'd take the car there just not only for my personal fun, but we want to take the car there and say, this car's from Plattsburgh. And you know, this is the story about Lozier, and this is the story about Plattsburgh. And you know, we have this really nice city, you know, a village along the lake, and maybe you should come take a look at it. And you know, who knows what we can get out of that? We might get lucky and strike it big with somebody who, you know, will bring their business here to park. We'd like to use the car for promotions for the town.
It's good for everybody when you do that. It makes you feel personally satisfied. I noticed that, whoops, there she goes, right over there. Oh boy, we got great old cars coming in here. What I started to say was, it doesn't take long for a person moving here to become connected with this area. For one reason or another, it's infectious, isn't it? And you've only been here, what, 11 years?
11 years. And
You're already a part of the fabric, whether you like it or not.
if everything goes according to plan, I plan to be buried in this city, and I have no reason to leave it. It's
Hopefully
been
for
good.
not another 50 or 60 years.
Well, I know, but it's been really good, and I've had the opportunity to travel. I've lived in numerous places in the United States. I lived in England for 5 years. I lived in Santiago, Chile for 2 years. I can say I've been around the world, and I tell you, when it comes down to it, this is one of the most beautiful places I've ever lived, and to raise my kids here, I think it's just perfect. We actually did, I'll tell you a side story. We went to the Dearborn, we went to the Henry Ford Museum last summer out in Dearborn, outside of Detroit, and I had my daughters with me, and we had great fun there. We went to the Detroit Zoo, which is a wonderful zoo. The museum, if anybody's in the Dearborn area, you have to go to the Henry Ford Museum. They have some very interesting things there, and it's cars and trains and planes and memorabilia from America in the 50s and 60s. It's a wonderful museum. But the part of the story is when we got back the following week, I was out on an inflatable behind the boat with my 7-year-old daughter, Lauren, who you spoke to today, and we're bouncing up. My wife was towing us up the lake, and she, out of the clear blue, she turned around and said to me, and I didn't prompt her in any way. She said, "You know, Daddy, I really like it here. I really didn't like Detroit."
Ooh, we probably won't send a copy of this to their Chamber of Commerce, but we've spent so much time promoting this area for all the reasons you've mentioned and reasons you haven't mentioned, and they include the wonderful people who live here.
The people are great. I mean, this is, I think that we have some very honest people here, some very hardworking people here, people who are really willing to help you out. Every once in a while I have to go back to Philadelphia for a variety of reasons, and I just look forward to coming back to Plattsburgh. It's a different society up here, and I think it's a very nice society, and we really are lucky, and I think anybody who's been born and raised here, probably young folks, have the enthusiasm to leave the area thinking this is a small town, just like I left Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And once again, it was very similar with Plattsburgh. But you know, you go and you experience some things in the other parts of the world, and then you come back here and you realize how nice it is. I've just really enjoyed it.
Let's talk just for a moment before we go and talk to Ron Venn and some others. Why you chose the field you chose?
Oh, well.
Because you know, you're such a bright ray of sunshine in this area, in your field, and we're so pleased to have you here doing what you do.
Once again, just as we were talking about Lozier, some things are meant to happen. As far as, you know, we were talking about the Lozier Museum. I think my career didn't initially go the way I had it planned. In fact, my first degree is in mechanical engineering, and I was really disappointed when I got turned down by General Motors Institute out of high school because I thought I was going to build cars for the rest of my life.
Isn't that amazing how things change?
Well, it does, but I went into engineering and did 2 degrees in engineering and worked in the hospital field. And decided, you know, I could do what those fellows are doing, those fellows and ladies are doing. So I went and got a medical degree after that. And then when it came down to doing training after medical school, sort of looked around at opportunities, just started talking to people. And when I was in medical school, I remember this fellow that had disease from his prostate cancer, and I was actually doing some subspecialty training in orthopedics at the time, orthopedic surgery, and we got into discussion about his prostate cancer, and I always remembered him, and perhaps he was the first one that sort of got me started in the right direction. And radiation oncology, it's a high-tech field. It's physics and math, and when I approached a few people and talked to them about who I was and my interests, they said, hey, look, you'd be perfect in the field because of your background. You'd be a unique person in the field because of your engineering background. And it has worked. It really has. I have insight into the equipment and what we're doing with the equipment and the radiobiology that's associated with it. And it's worked very well.
Like I said early in this program that we are on the cusp of an exciting time and celebrating the North Country's history. That's true of medicine, and especially in your field with new technology, new genetics. We're learning so much right now that you're right on the edge of it, aren't you? The cutting edge.
Well, I'm so much on the edge of it. In 10 or 20 years, I might not have a job. That's reality. I mean,
be restoring Lozier's by then.
Well, I'll have to look for a different career, but we are at a point because of the Human Genome Project where we've decoded the DNA of a human being now. We're able to take a close look into how cells are put together, and that's not cancers, normal cells, but cancer cells. And with that information, we'll be able to develop new techniques, new strategies, new drugs to treat cancer. And the hope right now is in the next 10 or 15 years, maybe we won't cure cancer, but we'll get it to the point where it'll just be a quiet, chronic disease such as diabetes, that yes, you need treatment for it on a continual basis, but you're not going to die from it. I mean, that's how diabetes, before the development of manufactured insulin, people would die of their diabetes. There was no way of controlling their sugars. And we think that's what's going to happen with cancer in the next decade. We're going to figure out how to control the disease and keep it under control.
Are you doing research?
Well, we do at the Fitzpatrick Cancer Center. I'm a principal investigator for the National Cancer Institute through a group called RTOG, Radiation Therapy Oncology Group. And what our job is to recruit patients for protocols that the NCI has developed. We have some local people who have gone on our protocols to test new strategies for radiation therapy, and we take that information and put it together at the NCI with all the other centers across the country. And it's sort of neat. We're a community-based hospital that's doing this work. Most of the people in RTOG are the Sloan Ketterings of the world, the Harvards, the Dana-Farbers, and there are a few community hospitals that have reached the level that can be associated with the NCI to do this work. And here in Plattsburgh, we are one of them. So we do this research with the NCI's guidance, and we contribute, and we've actually had some success stories. One of the protocols that we had about 8 years ago was a different way of delivering radiation therapy, and we put a lady on the protocol who had this really incurable cancer, and we cured her. And since then, the protocol has been completed. They had 1,000 patients or so on it, and they published the results and said, yep, it does really work. And it's the standard for our head and neck cancer patients. We follow that protocol that we started doing about 8 years ago on a research basis. It's now considered the standard of care.
A lot of good things happening in your life. Before we finish this portion of our interview with you, I want to bring up back the museum again, because we're still on the ground floor, right, with this museum. What's happening and how can people contribute if we got them all excited today?
Well, we need things, and we need the support of the community. If there's anybody out there that has Lozier memorabilia, we have a nonprofit corporation set up through the Chamber of Commerce here in Plattsburgh where people can make donations. We're looking for funding. We need money like any project like this. We believe we have the mayor and the Senator Stafford very interested in the project. They've indicated that they are, because this will do something for the city. And we can get that momentum going we feel that the funds will become available, both large and small. And then it'll just be a chance of, or not a chance, but the finding the right location and getting started with the project. And we're always looking for volunteers. We're currently looking for a historian who would like to get involved with the project. We have some unique people already on the committee, but a historian is somebody that we just haven't found yet. And we're also looking for somebody who can, perhaps somebody who's retired, but a good spokesman for the project. Somebody who can take this project out and meet with people and talk to them about getting the project to grow and getting corporate sponsors. We have the Penny Saver already as one of our corporate sponsors. We also have Media Central as one of our corporate sponsors, and we recently acquired a fire truck. That sounds a little silly, but if you think about it, well, yeah, we have a fire truck. I'm going to tell you in front of the camera. My wife doesn't know yet.
Fortunately, this won't be shown for a few weeks,
Yeah.
so you're safe until you go home and tell her.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, for my poor wife, I bring these things home and then inform her, and then she finds out about them. We've acquired it was a very inexpensive acquisition, and the reason we did it. But once again, we want to do an interactive museum for children and adults. And I've been to a place called the Kids Space out in Pasadena, California with my daughters. And they had a place where it was a museum, but it was a hands-on museum. And one of the places they had, one of the cubicles, was a firehouse. And the kids loved it. They got to climb on the fire truck, they got to put the coats on, the helmets, and they got to learn about it a little bit. So we've got a fire truck now, and we will have on our transportation museum a firehouse.
I love it. Isn't it great? What a great plan. What a great day. The rain has held off. I should tell the people that on June 23rd, there was a deluge. I bet you we got over 3 inches of rain in the North Country all told. We did watch that Saranac River behind our house, but everybody's fine. Tomato plants are all upright, and so are we. So there's something to be said for this day. We're going to find Ron Venn and talk about his models again for about the 23rd time on this program, and we'll continue talking about the Lozier on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base. Tony said, I forgot my other daughter. I didn't mention my other daughter. What was her name? Paige? Paige. You got to get Paige on television. I wish they were here today, but they're at home right now, and perhaps they'll show up a little bit later. Owen, we're having so much fun here, talking about the Lozier automobile and Lozier boats and the Lozier plant. Calvin keeps telling me that you got to explain a little bit about some of these dead ends. You've put a lot of miles on your car looking for things that just turned out to be a will-o'-the-wisp. I want you to recall a few of those for me.
Well, anyhow, I would check out every lead that came my way. And one guy described a Lozier to me that was white with a lot of brass on it. And he told me that it was down in Keysville on the back of Auger Pond. And I took a nice Saturday in summertime, and I drove around the pond, and I basically stopped at every house that was old enough to have a Lozier in. And nobody knew anything about a Lozier. They just looked at me like I didn't know what was going on. But in any event, I chased down that one and plus other ones that never really materialized.
People somehow, they really believe they saw one, or they believe they know somebody who has one.
Right.
And they'll swear on it. You walk in and open the garage and there's nothing there but an old bicycle and 3 dead rats.
Well, you look around, you follow. I had one guy tell me a lead in Vermont that there was an old white Lozier, and I went there, and there was such a car, but it wasn't a Lozier. It was a Stutz Bearcat.
Oh, that's nice too,
Very 1916 Stutz Bearcat.
Oh, that's nice.
Beautiful car, and you just got to follow every lead there is. You just can't leave any stone unturned.
But look at the fun you've had.
Oh, great fun.
Look at the fun you had. I mean, some people collect matchbook covers and empty beer cans. Lozier stuff is way better.
I would say it is. It's a hobby of mine, and it's also been a real passion to do this.
Where were you born and brought up? Chazy?
Chazy, basically. Born in Mariah, New York.
Oh, Mariah, yeah.
Right. Went to school here in Chazy. Graduated in '62. Worked in a different area. Worked for Anchor Motor Freight for many years. Then I went down to Florida and worked for a couple of transportation companies down there and Now I'm basically retired, living in Safety Harbor.
But you have to come up and see us every now and then.
Well, in the summertime, not in the
you
winter.
You wouldn't have missed this event today for the world. I know you would.
If I had to hitchhike up here, I would have came out.
I know you. That's really great. Ron Venn, come on over here. We've interviewed Ron many, many times, almost a dozen times so far in our program, but I want to talk a little bit about the Lozier. How are you, first of all?
Okay.
Great to be with you out here today in the summertime 2001. How did you first get interested in Lozier?
Well, I used to hear my father talk about it, and I got interested in it from there. So then I started collecting like information when I could find at public libraries, Feinberg, looking through old car magazines, what I could find on the cars. And that's how I got started from there. But then I went to, from building like trains and trolleys and stuff like that, I thought I'd like to build one out of wood instead. So they got there's one company that makes cars, but it's most like a basic type thing, but it's not what I wanted. So I ended up just drawing up my own blueprints and building my own Lozier car from photographs.
They're right here, huh?
They're right there.
These are the plans
Those
that
are
you
the
made.
plans.
When did you start?
I started in January of 2000, and I worked on them off and on until around May. And then June 9th, I started building the car.
Well, we've been at your kitchen table numerous times for this Our Little Corner television show, and we've watched it in the process until now they're finally complete. We were very pleased when your Lozier models went on display at the North Country Cultural Center there in downtown Plattsburgh, and we want to thank those people for inviting you there. You had a lot of fun over there, didn't you?
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. Lasted about a month, so go down once in a while. Then Sylvia would call you up to go down to put these, explain about Lozier cars and the trolleys when school classes would come in to do things about that. So I went down about 3-4 times that she called me up to go down to be there at certain times.
So that's very, very interesting. And as most of our viewers know, Ron loves to take photographs as well as build things. And so you're on this Lozier Museum committee as the photographer. That's kind of neat, huh?
Yeah, that's what he calls me.
So you're going to meet with these people and take pictures when you can.
Yeah.
Actually, you got some pictures of the Lozier plant in here that we've seen on our program, right?
Yeah.
And you got to go inside it.
Yeah, I go inside, the way it looks like.
See what it looks like now. You also took pictures of your cars. And how did you get a picture like that? Did you have to lay right on the ground?
Yeah, that's what I did. When I was working up in Cernak, I brought the car with me in my camera. So then I got in, where I work at my cousin's there. There's a road that goes to a back of a sawmill. So I took one of the roads. I put the car in the roadway. I got laid down on the ground and tried to shoot it from ground level. So it looks like a real car, but it's not a real car. It's a miniature. So
it actually does look like a real car. We got some more. I'm just going to turn the pages and let Kelvin show us here what we got.
Well,
that's with you're changing a tire there, huh?
Well, when I built it, I glued 2 tires on, but I wanted to leave some off, like for detail shots, to get the idea so it looks like a real car. So I left 2 tires off and just took them off so you can see what it looks like underneath, like how detailed the car is.
Oh, what you got some wonderful pictures here. How many pictures do you think you've taken in your lifetime, Ron? Thousands.
Probably about thousands.
Yeah,
something
I
like
would
that.
say it would have to be in the thousands. You got some decent lighting. Was this taken in your house?
No, it's in my backyard.
In your backyard?
Yeah. I got a table I set up. I set it on a piece of cardboard and put the car on there.
I just want our audience to know that you are a stickler for details.
Yeah.
You don't just take a picture of a Lozier car and build it the way you think it is. You draw the plans.
I draw the plans.
You try to get right down to the smallest detail you can, right?
Yeah.
What was the hardest part?
Probably the engine, because you had to fit in. You had to make it. You had to scale it the right size, because I didn't have a scale to go by. All I had was just looking at photographs. So I had to scale the motor, and build it just right so it fit. So it fit in between like the frame and the radiator and like that for clearance, because the engine was kind of big. There's the plans there.
These are the details. It took you a long time just to draw those.
I started in January and finished in May. I worked on them off and on.
Unbelievable.
These are how the wheels were made.
Explain that to me.
Well, it starts out as a half-inch piece of plywood, but I had to run it through my wood planer to 3/8. From there, I had a hole saw to cut the tires out. Then you clamp the tire down, you drill the centers out. But this part here, that's where I'm running off the sides. I have to run off as like a block. Then I drill the centers out after. From there, I went to the rims and the wheels. 'Cause I had to figure out how I was going to do that. So that's how the spokes are made. So they're cut out with a Dremel tool, then filed out, then sanded round. So I don't want them square.
Now these were originally wooden spoke wheels on the car, right?
Yeah, they're wooden spokes. So the top gives you an idea like what it looks like in stages, like how the spokes are made. These are all the parts for one wheel. There's 31 pieces in one wheel.
31 pieces in one wheel.
Yeah, these are all the pieces on the bottom, and this is like the tire and the rim together, and then this is the tire and this is the rim itself. This is the frame here, how the frame started. Because the frame has like a little bend in it. I want to glue two pieces of wood and glue to one another, because just in case with age it might come apart. So I want to make it all one strip. So I had to take plans from my drawings, transfer them into a strip of wood, then cut them out, and then cut out the dark spots. So I get that little curve in the frame. So after the frames were filed out, then I got the frame, tires, brakes, gas tanks.
How many parts in each one?
Well, what part?
How many parts in each car?
Well, there's 868 parts in one car. There's 204 parts in the motor. There's 48.
204 parts in the motor?
Just the motor alone.
Most of which people can't even see.
Not including the transmission.
Oh, wow. This just gives an idea. Some of the people who are thinking about building models.
Yeah.
It's not just a matter of carving it. You've got to think out ahead of time.
Yeah, how you gonna plan the certain parts?
Why two cars, Ron? Why two different?
Well, I was gonna build one out of wood at first, but then after a while, someone wondered, well, what color were they painted? So I decided to build another one, but paint it like the way they were painted from like around 1911. So that's why I went with the painted version and the wood one. But the wood one is done with I think there's like 6 different kinds of stain that I use for different shades.
Really? Absolutely beautiful. Now this gives an idea about the engine.
That's the engine.
Completed engine.
The other one is the engine all in pieces. One's together, that one's all in parts.
Right here. Wow. 200 and some parts.
204 parts in the motor. The cylinders are made out of 5/8 dowels. Then I have to saw them on one side so I can glue them together. Then I saw them so I make the two cylinders at a time. And it's got the little bolts that mount the cylinders on, the little flange like braces on the cylinders. It's got the magneto, exhaust manifold, water lines, radiator hoses, starter motor, oil pump.
Bring your microscope if you come to look at these, because inside every one of those there is all these parts. How many?
204 parts in the motor.
204 parts in each motor alone. Absolutely incredible. Then you come to the frame.
Yeah, then the frame.
And you've still never seen a regular Lozier, have you?
Not yet.
Hopefully that one will get here before we finish filming today, and we'll be able to get a look at it. I know Tony tells us it was on its way.
Yeah, that's what he's telling me.
Now we were talking, I'm going to just flip pages as we're talking here, and you can just jump in anywhere. Calvin was talking to Tony. Tony, when they get this museum finished, they would like to have a hands-on museum that kids can enjoy.
Yeah.
And we were wondering if it would be possible for a guy like Ron Venn to build a huge wooden version of a Lozier motor that kids could climb on and touch, get inside. If somebody told you to do that, I bet you could do it.
Well, probably. I just have to enlarge my blueprints bigger so I can copy it.
Yes, you would. About 10 times the normal size. You could do just about anything if somebody gave you an idea.
Yeah.
Because you've faced a lot of challenges before. We should tell our viewers who haven't watched our previous programs with you that you've built lots of things, not just these cars, but all kinds of dump trucks and tow trucks and backhoes and
guns and
airplanes.
Airplanes.
And model cars and
snowplow.
dioramas of war scenes and snowplows. And
that's how the headlights for me.
Just absolutely incredible. If anybody is interested in seeing the Ron Venn memorabilia, hopefully we'll get a lot of his stuff on display. We've been working very hard to make sure that the public knows about what you're doing, because I know it's a lot of fun. It's very satisfying for you, but it also makes you feel good when people say, "Whoa, look at that. That is so neat." Just making the louvers
Yeah.
for the hood, or as they would say in England, the bonnet. That's pretty good all by itself. That's a lot of hard work, right?
Yeah, it takes a while to do when you're doing 2 cars. You have to build double of everything.
Unbelievable. Now would this be this car?
Huh?
Would this be this car right
That's
here?
that car.
That's this one.
Or both of them.
Wow. Now we'll take a look at this. And that doesn't look like a real photograph of a real Lozier engine.
That's the close-up I took before I put it into the car.
It looks absolutely real, right down to the fan. It looks like the artist drawings that we've seen of the Lozier motors
Yeah.
over on another table before we got here today. What you've done is pretty spectacular and wonderfully special. And the fact that you've chronicled the whole thing in the process
Yeah.
makes it even more interesting to me.
Well, in case I want to build another one, I can remember how to build certain parts.
Unbelievable.
That's a price list. What I spent.
Oh, golly gee. Everything you spent? Huh?
That's the parts list. You know, like all the parts.
1,736 parts for 2 cars. And he's got it all listed. Oh, my. Now, let's say 148 days, 905 hours. Now, let's say you're making minimum wage, and somebody wanted to buy one of these, and you charge them, wow, I don't think I could afford one. That's amazing. But
Yeah.
you don't do it to make money, do you?
No.
Just do it because you want to do it.
Yeah, and something different, or something that was built here in the city.
Yeah, that's even better. Ron has taken about 1,000 photographs, before and after photographs, which we've seen many times. Are you building anything right now, Ron?
Not now. I'm starting to draw blueprints out for the Eagle.
What eagle?
The Eagle sailed at Valcour during the Battle of Gloucester.
No kidding.
Yeah, that's Nancy Donahoe's idea.
Oh my goodness, that'll be great. So you're drawing your plans.
I'm drawing the
Have you
plan.
ever built a boat before? A ship?
Well, I did them as kits. My brother and I got this paddle wheeler, so it's all it was together, but I get like an idea like how they go together and like that. So I'm drawing plans up for that.
Oh, I can't wait to see that. Let us know when you really get started on it, okay?
Okay.
We'll be over to your place. We know how to get to 72
Yeah.
Bailey Avenue, you know.
Yeah, sure.
We know how to get there.
I know.
And Ron also built an exact replica of the entrance to the old Bailey Avenue County Fairgrounds, which was right behind its house. You got a little mileage on that. You showed it at the fair.
Yeah, it was at the fair. It was at the Council of the Arts. She had me bring it down there.
So that's wonderful. Anyway, we never know what the next chapter is going to be.
No.
And if you see Ron Venn's bicycle going by your house, maybe he's going somewhere to take a picture or build something in the future. We'll continue our program from the Air Base Oval as part of the 3rd Annual Great Adirondack Antique and Classic Car Show 2001.
Bill Ledoux has it.
This is excitement personified. This wonderful lady walks in and says her husband worked, her father worked for Lozier. She's bringing us letters and pictures, and Tony's going, ooh, ooh, ooh. Who are you?
I'm Lucille Willette from Moores.
Lucille.
Yes.
Tell me about your dad's connection with Lozier.
Well, my dad was Edward Perry, and he lived in Moores, and he was a farm boy, and at the age of 17, he left for Plattsburgh to go. He wanted to make his world cars, and he walked into Lozier's, and they put him out the other door, and he just kept going back and back until they actually hired him, and he was sweeping floors for them. And the first thing you know, he's involved with the making of the cars, and when Lozier left Plattsburgh and moved to Detroit, Dad went with him.
Now, this story sounds familiar, deja vu. Isn't this a story that Owen was telling us?
Yes, Owen came and interviewed my father a few years ago, and spent most of the afternoon with him. And
How could you help it?
it was really interesting, you know. And then my father, I think it was after Lozier went out of business that Dad went to Dodge Brothers. And yes, and he helped to build the first Dodge.
No kidding. Now,
Yeah.
you brought some pictures. First of all, I want to hold this up. Did Calvin get a picture of it yet?
It's in the back.
All right, on the back. Now, tell me what we're looking at there.
Well, this is Old Betsy. That's the first Dodge. And the gentlemen that are sitting in it are the Dodge Brothers.
Wow.
And then these
Where's
are...
your dad? He's here somewhere.
My dad is right here.
Okay.
And that's about it. He's in here too. This is a picture of the 4 millionth Dodge or something. And then I have a...
Now, this, when was this thing published? Does anybody know? What would the date be on this thing?
It must be on the front of it.
It says Dodge News.
Yeah.
Talks about the 20th century and who was behind in your transportation. I can't tell, but it wasn't yesterday morning. I guarantee you that.
I don't
No,
know. Is this the picture he said he thought was the Lozier?
I don't know.
Tony
We'll
thought
talk
that
to
might
Tony
be the
after.
Lozier.
That's a beautiful photograph.
These are my father. Pictures of my dad.
We'll just take a look at this one for a second. Oh, he said that was definitely the front of a Lozier. You don't know who that is in the picture, though.
Oh, and my father.
That is
Oh,
your
yes.
dad at the
Oh,
wheel.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, that. And what was your dad's name again?
Edward Perry.
Edward Perry.
Uh-huh.
Oh, what a beautiful,
And I,
beautiful shot.
Yeah, I just found these and I thought I'd bring them down to...
Well, let's take a look at this other one here. You think this may be the first Dodge
Yes.
because there's some writing on the back. Who was
Yes.
the other lady that was here with you?
That's my daughter, Luann Willette.
Okay, we got to give her a little plug here. And her granddaughter. And your granddaughter too.
Yes, uh-huh.
Is this your dad's writing on the
Yes,
back?
it's very hard to read.
Dear Sister Ida, I'll drop you this card, and he's talking about driving for miles and.
Yes, he tested the cars, and he would go about it. In those days, 300 miles was a lot of driving in one day because they were all dirt roads. And he would average driving about 300 miles a day testing.
It's so neat because not only do you have the picture, but then you've got the writing on the back.
Yeah.
You've got other photographs as well.
Well, this is the one that that's another Dodge, so.
Another Dodge,
Yeah.
car number 500,000.
Yeah, that's him in it.
How many of these old pictures do
Well,
you
I don't have
have?
too many, really. I've showed them to John Southwick a few times, and he gets a big kick out of them, you know.
We all know about John Southwick and his love for automobiles and different
Yeah.
people whom he's had contact with, driving his cars in parades and.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Isn't that terrific? But what do you think about all this renewed history?
Well, I think
at
it's
Lozier?
wonderful. I got such a kick out of it when Owen called me from Florida the other night, and he said there was going to be this show and that the car would be here. And I said, oh, I've got to come down and see what a Lozier looked like.
Now, did your dad talk a lot about Lozier when you were growing up?
Yes. It was really his life. He had a passion for cars. And he said that they made them all by hand, you know.
Oh, sure.
And it was, when Owen interviewed him, I really sat there in awe, you know. It was really nice to hear it all repeated again.
I wonder if Owen, did he tape record?
No, he said when he called a couple times there
Where's
the
Owen?
other night, he said he was sorry that he hadn't taped it, you know.
He should have called Calvin and me. We would have sat right there and had the video camera going. Those are great pieces of information. Is your dad still with us?
No, my dad passed away, but that day he just sat there and it just came flowing out like it was yesterday, you know. It was really fun, yeah.
You're a pretty proud daughter, I can
Yes,
tell.
I am.
You have other brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have a sister that lives in Michigan, and I have a brother that lives in Missouri.
Your sister doesn't live in Detroit, does she?
No.
Oh, I was going to say.
We did, though, for years. I was in Detroit for 23 years.
Have you met any other people whose parents or grandparents worked at Lozier here?
No, I haven't.
See how lucky we are to have you here today. And I don't have to I guess I do have to tell our audience that we almost had to hold her here by force. What you can't see is a piece of wire wrapped around her foot, tied to a stake, and driven in the ground so she can't get away.
Well, Calvin knows how I love to have my picture taken from basketball games.
Really mechanically inclined, too.
Oh, yeah. Is that something we ought to get into?
That's not nice, Calvin.
Let's just walk over here and say, isn't it neat, Tony, to meet somebody whose dad worked?
Oh yeah, I
for
think it's
Lozier?
great. It's actually great, and there are a lot of people here in the community's families work for Lozier. Yeah,
It's so much fun to look
but
at.
even been neater to work there ourselves.
Oh boy, we gotta build a time machine.
Well, we do. I actually just got handed this. The gentleman who had to leave with his grandchildren. Fellow Wesley Vaughn just approached me and said, "Here, I want you to have this." And some of the things we've already have copies of. But one of the things he just gave me is a letter. He said we can keep it and have it for display purposes.
I love it.
It says Lozier Motor Company. And it says, "Dear sir, we are looking for a young man who we can break in to run a milling machine, and Mr. Vo thinks you would possibly work into this all right. And if you are desirous of obtaining employment in our shops at the present time, we will be glad to give you a trial. If you decide to come, however, we want it understood that you will remain in our employ for some length of time, as we would not care to go to the trouble of breaking a man in to do this work and then have him leave as soon as he began to be of some use to us. Yours truly, the manager of Lozier Motor Company." This was to Mr. Leo Barnard, who was this gentleman's father-in-law.
Isn't it great?
Yeah, and he actually worked in the company.
Oh, that's,
So we have that to put on display.
and you didn't know that was going to happen.
No,
today.
the gentleman just handed it to me 30 seconds ago, and he decided like I said, he had to leave. But
The
he said,
more,
"Here."
the
He
more
said, "Just-"
people who know about your effort, the more this kind of thing will happen.
Oh yeah, this will come out of not long ago I received a postcard from somebody that was postmarked 1911 and had a picture of the Lozier factory on the front of it. People find these things. It's in drawers. It's hidden away in places yet. Not all of it's been thrown away, so we slowly collected.
All right, now there are people scanning the horizon for the 1915 Lozier. It's now 11:33 in the morning, and have you received? I've heard your phone ring a few times.
Well, I had my father-in-law check the answering machine at home just to see if there was a message, and there wasn't. So I just keep waiting.
Don't know.
Just don't know yet. I just don't know. Certainly.
Maybe he went to Prattsburg instead of Plattsburgh.
Or
huh?
Pittsburgh,
Or
where I used to live.
I got to tell an anecdote right here. It has absolutely nothing to do with this show today. Louis Armstrong, who was an idol of mine, whose career I followed for a long time and was lucky enough to MC some shows he was in, came to our radio station locally back in many, many years ago in 1964. Having joined our celebration for the sesquicentennial here in Plattsburgh and marching in our parade on his birthday on the 4th of July, 1964. So we invited him to the radio station to do some promotional announcements.
Mm-hmm.
And he was supposed to say, "Hi, this is Louis Satchmo Armstrong. And every time I'm in Plattsburgh, I listen to," and the name of the radio station.
Right.
Well, after 52 takes,
52.
or more, because every time he said it, he said, "Hi, this is Louis Satchmo Armstrong, and every time I'm in Pittsburgh, oh blank Plattsburgh," and he always had that favorite expletive of his in the middle, and we couldn't figure out quite how to edit them. So he never got it right, but we had some of the best bloopers of all time.
Well, it sounds good. It's
I
good.
love it. So maybe he made it to Pittsburgh, and maybe
He
he'll
might be
here
in
a little
Pittsburgh for all I
a little
know.
bit later today.
Yeah.
Tony, thank you so much for inviting us here and for making us a part of your project. You must promise to keep us up to date, and every now and again we'll do another chapter in the Lozier story.
I'd love it if you would. Thanks for coming out.
Tony Vaccaro, Plattsburgh Air Force Base. We're going to maybe find Randy Beach and talk a little bit about the rest of this car show in just a moment. All right, we're in the parking lot that I have parked in at least 10,000 times over the years. Every time I drive onto the old base, Randy Beach or Park, those old feelings stir, and I just love it out here. There's so much great history. And today, for your third annual car show, there's a lot of history here. You got some beautiful cars.
Yes, we do, Gordy. We're very happy that there's such a great turnout. We're up around 130 cars so far.
Are you really?
Even without the sun. Now, if the sun were here, we'd do a lot better. But without the sun, we're still doing a great showing today.
I don't think we're going to get one drop of rain on this parade today. Thank God it wasn't yesterday, right?
I hope you're right. Yeah, and thank God it wasn't yesterday's right.
How many cars did you hope to get here?
Actually, if we'd had if we'd had a sunny day, we should have topped 150 to 200 without any problem. But the weather scares people away. The open cars don't want to show up, and I don't blame them. I know exactly what people go through with the older and open cars. They just don't want to get them dirty, and you can't blame them.
How far do they come for this?
We've had them come from in the past. They've come from anywhere from 200 to 300 miles. Some of them. We have done quite a bit of advertising this year, trying to get them from across the lake in Vermont and up in Quebec. And we have quite a few Quebec cars here today, and quite a few Vermont cars here, which is excellent. And I also noticed a few Ontario cars come in, so that's always encouraging.
There are a lot of dyed-in-the-wool antique car fans. People like me who've always dreamed of owning that classic automobile. And I've owned a lot of old cars in my lifetime, but in raising all of our kids, I never quite had enough money to get them restored. But we can live vicariously through some of these other owners here who, and you can tell, these are their babies.
Oh yes, there's. You don't want to touch them or get too close to them, especially if you're driving another car, because they. If you are in the hobby, you will know that it's very expensive. But it's also these people spend hours and hours working on these cars, and they take great pride in them, and as a result don't want to see them hurt or damaged, and that's good. That's because
how many? Go ahead.
No, it's nice to see them preserved, because this is our heritage actually.
How many do you own?
Actually, I only have, because my sons have taken a couple of them, I only have 3 at this point, which is good.
Well, talk about them. I see you driving around in 1 or 2 of them once in a while.
Well, I have a 1930 Chrysler sedan, which isn't here today because it needed a rear seal in it, and it was a wedding present to my wife.
Really?
Yep. So it's been around I've owned it for 31 years now, which is great.
Oh, wow.
And I have a Dodge Touring 1920, which also isn't here because it's got the engine out of it. We're in the process of restoring that. And I do have my 1948 Jeep here, which is an original vehicle except for the paint job just got done on it. And it came out of Maine. A friend of ours over there had it, and I was able to obtain it from them. And that's about it at this point.
Talk about a piece of Americana.
That's
the
right.
Jeep, huh?
That's right.
Wow.
That's right.
So what's your favorite car here today? You've seen a lot of them go by you. You've been waving your arms like a maniac here, trying to get them all in on time.
I'm always partial to the very old ones, but there's, I think Mr. George Button from Lake Placid is here with an Auburn. I'm not sure of the year on it, but he's out there in the classic car section, and it's an absolutely beautiful car. He's won many awards with it, and it's a very, very fine restoration and an absolutely beautiful machine.
Some of the most difficult moments of my life have been spent trying to judge antique cars, and so I refuse to do it anymore because sometimes I've had to sneak through the back lot to get away. It's not an easy thing. How do you go about picking judges, and what's different about the judging for this show than others?
Well, it's in shows that Jim Judkins and I did for the Hysterical Association years ago. We used to do our own judging, and as you say, you learn that you try to stay out of the way of that. So we learned that quickly, and we decided instead that what we do here is we use a self-judging program in which each person who brings a car in judges half of the field, and if their car is in one half of the field, then they judge the other half, and we have it delineated on a sheet of paper. And
I love it. Listen to that. That sounds a little bit like a Corvette.
Yeah, and that way they get to judge. The people get to participate, and everybody gets around to see everybody's car. and we found that it usually, what's surprising is it usually is quite fair, and we have used this for a number of years now, and it seems to work fair, and it makes it a lot easier for us running the show, because we only have to then go out and choose the best to show and the oldest car and that type of thing. It makes it a little bit easier for us.
How important an event is this for you personally and for Park?
Well, for me, it's personally, I've been playing with antique cars all my life, it seems, and I love it. So it's very important to me. To Park, it's a chance for Park to showcase itself out here, to get people participating, being part of the property, and that's good for everybody. It's a very important event for the Chamber of Commerce because it raises funds for the Chamber, and that's really why we do it that's the main reason. We started this, and Jody Parks at the Chamber has done a great job with organizing this and making it one of our major fundraisers during the year. And I think and I hope that long after I'm no longer chair of the Chamber, that Jody and other members of the Chamber will continue to work it and make it grow and grow till it becomes one of the major car shows in the Champlain Valley.
You've done a lot of showcasing of Park lately. How would you assess the situation right now?
I think Park is moving along extremely well. I think it is. There are a lot of things on the horizon coming at us. It is the future of the North Country. I think our biggest problem is finding jobs or people to work the jobs. We have companies that want to come here. It's a matter of finding people to fill those jobs for them. And I think what we're going to see more and more of as time goes on is people will commute more and more from the surrounding counties and the surrounding possibly the surrounding state of Vermont, but definitely out of Essex and Franklin County. I think you will see more and more people commuting into Clinton County, and that's good for everybody.
That's great. We're happy to be here with you. Thanks for allowing us to come on to the base today and be a part of it, Randy.
Thank you, Gordy, very much, and thank you for being here.
Randy Beach from Park and the Chamber of Commerce. I want to walk in front of Calvin and talk to an old friend of mine who I'm watching the juices flow as the cars go by. Jim Judkins, how are you?
Very well, very well.
What do you think about some of these cars?
Well, I think they're very great.
We got 100 and some here today.
Yeah, it's a very good turnout, even though the weather is not the best, although it's a lot better than having a bright sun and baking. If the rain will hold off, and I think it will, it looks like it's clearing up. It's a very nice day. Very excellent turnout.
Jim has always had old cars ever since I've known him. How many do you have now, Jim?
I'm down to 4.
Down to 4?
Down to 4.
What's the most you ever had?
7. I had 7 at one time, and then when I went to Vietnam, I sold them, and then I've been collecting since.
So what have you got right now?
I've got my mother-in-law's old 41 Lincoln Continental. That's an old Plattsburgh car.
Yeah.
I've got a 22 Rio that belongs to my wife, 7,000 original miles on it. I've got a 30 Model A Roadster, 6-wheel. And, well, it's not an antique, but I've got an 85 Corvette, low mileage.
Oh,
so
boy.
That's enough.
Way back when I first met you, I don't know how many decades ago, Jim was in the banking business and said, you know, Gordy, antique cars aren't a bad investment. Do you still feel that way?
Oh, yes, yes. Well, you know, that's how I got married. My wife's father was Walter Church, and he had the collection of cars.
We
and
talked about him a little bit today.
Oh, did you? Well, he wasn't too happy to have another son-in-law in the family who came from Missouri because his other daughter married a Missouri pilot. But I went down to the house one day, and he was working on his little Crossley hotshot and couldn't get it running, so I crawled underneath it and connected a couple 3 wires, and to the grace of God, I got it running. He thought that was a good spouse for his daughter, so from then on, I could do no wrong.
You've been connecting with this show right from the beginning, too, haven't you?
Yes, Randy and I did the one for the Historical Association, so this is probably, I think, Randy and mine 8th car show.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He was telling us about some of the experiences of having to judge the cars.
Oh, yes. Sometimes it doesn't make a lot of French. I remember one time I got caught into judging cars over at Stowe, Vermont, which is a very big meet, and I had a Stanley steamer, and a beautiful Stanley steamer, and I would have done the same thing the guy did. He put hydraulic brakes on it, but I had to disqualify him from first place, so I think he had a contract out on me for several years. So you don't make a lot of friends when you judge cars.
You're still here, and we don't know where he is right now.
Right.
But
so judging the cars is very hard, extremely hard. You've got to have the guide rules, and you got to go by those rules, and authenticity is one of the things that makes the cars as they are. You can always put a late model engine into a Model A, but it's no longer a Model A, although it's a lot more reliable. So that's where I come from. I try to keep them as original as possible, so that you have the old fun. And
once it gets in your blood, it never goes away, does it?
Yes, it is. It's a very expensive hobby, but it's very rewarding too. The thing about it is you meet everybody. The big car shows, you can be talking to a vice president of General Motors who's got an antique car there, and he's talking techniques and talking different things with the guy who's got the corner filling station, and they're talking about the same car, and one looks as good as the other one. So you meet an awful cross-section of Americana at the old car meets.
Have you ever been to Hershey?
No, I haven't.
You gotta be kidding, Judkins.
Yes, I have never been to Hershey, unfortunately.
Unbelievable.
I know it is. It is.
I meant to ask Tony Vaccaro if he's ever been there, because I wouldn't be surprised if he could find Lozier parts at Hershey, because they've got everything else in the world.
Well, it would take you 3 days to go through the whole. I mean, it's just the Mecca. It is the Mecca of antique cars at Hershey.
Just never made it, huh?
Nope, never had to. Well, when I was really interested in doing the collecting, I was in the Air Force, and it never seemed like I could get the time off to go down there. And now I've got some restrictions, but I'll make it. You got to have some goals in life.
Yes, you do. And you and I have had a lot, and most of mine have never been achieved. I hope we live long enough. It's great to be here today, and it's a lot of fun to look around and see a successful meet like this, and a little tip of the hat to the weatherman for at least not giving us the deluge we had yesterday, right, Jim?
Oh, yes. Boy, last year was horrible.
Yeah,
but we still had people that came out, and I take my hat off to them.
That's great. Jim, thanks for talking with us. Good luck.
Thank you, Gordy. We'll see you.
Yeah, Calvin said the only way I can make you look young is to show old cars on television. So there are lots of cars here that are older than I am. This is all part of the 3rd annual Great Adirondack Antique and Classic Car Show. Park and the Chamber of Commerce have been kind enough to allow us to come here to talk about the Lozier. Not only the Lozier Type 82, but the entire Lozier story here in the city of Plattsburgh. Our thanks to Dr. Tony Vaccaro, whose dream is to have a museum here in Plattsburgh spotlighting his car and other old Lozier cars and memorabilia. Our special thanks to our friend Owen Barkham, who showed up here to talk about his longtime passion for the last 39 or 40 years for the Lozier automobile. Our friend Ron Venn, whom we've interviewed numerous times as well, and all the other folks who stopped by to say, yeah, I knew somebody who used to work for Lozier in Plattsburgh. It's been an extreme kick for Calvin and myself to be here in the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base Oval. I think the weather's getting warmer. I hate to be the harbinger of bad things, but it doesn't look too bad right now. So maybe this 3rd classic car show will be a success in that it won't get rained on today, and that's wonderful. It's been a great time for us, and I hope a great time for you. Once again, if you have any ideas about any future programs, subjects, individuals, places that you'd like us to visit, we'd love to hear from you. Just look up Calvin's phone number in the phone book. It's Hometown Cable on the Ridge Road in Champlain. If you'd like to donate $50,000 or $60,000 to underwrite this program, or even 50 cents, so that we can continue to bring you these great shows, please contact Calvin at Hometown Cable anytime. Thanks again for watching. Tell your friends about it, and check it out the next time.